Hello, everyone.
Hey guys, on today's podcast, we're going to be talking about teaching your taken in hand how to speak respectfully.
But of course, before we get to that, we want to make sure that you hit the like button if you're enjoying this content. And of course, always hit the subscribe button, because every time you hit the subscribe button, it makes me smile.
If you want to get bonus content, dive deeper into the topic of domestic discipline, everything we have to offer on the topic is over on Patreon. It also is a great way to support what we're doing here and help us continue to do it. So a link to our Patreon is down below.
I think this is something that I know as a head of household, I never thought about this when I first started in our relationship, but it's actually really, really important.
It is, because as a head of household, you really do have the power in the relationship to kind of set the tone.
That's absolutely right. And I think that's exactly where we want to start today is head of households. You've got to set that standard. You've got to be very, very clear about what you want the standard to be. I can tell you, when we first started the relationship, there were things that I would get frustrated about. And then I thought, wait, I never addressed that with her about how I wanted to be talked to, how I wanted to be addressed in order to feel like I was being respected and that I was being honored in the relationship.
That was definitely something that we struggled with establishing early on, and it's just because we didn't talk about it.
Yes, and the other thing is, I don't know if this is a fear with other head of households, but it was definitely a fear with me. There is this fear that if you set a standard of any kind with your taken in hand of how, again, you want to be talked to, and as specific as tone of voice, things that you want her to say, that somehow, again, you're being a dictator, or you're being abusive, or you're being overbearing, all of those things. And actually, those things could not be further from the truth, because here's why this is important. What you're doing is you're establishing in your dynamic, look, I care enough about our relationship that I care about how we address each other. I care about how we treat each other, especially with what we say and how we say it. And instead of just allowing things to progress however, we are going to set a standard of how we are going to communicate and talk to each other. And it's going to start with how you speak to me. Now, we'll get to this in just a minute. I don't want to dive too much in the specifics yet too, but that also goes both ways, head of households. But that's by establishing that, don't be afraid. Don't feel like you are becoming a dictator or that you are establishing things to be overbearing. No, what you're doing is you're saying, you know what? And I think a lot of you would agree, a lot of our disagreements, a lot of our arguments, and sometimes a lot of the problems that we have are because of the way we talk to each other. Even vocal inflection and how you go about saying something can go a long way to either hurting the relationship or helping the relationship.
It's interesting because as we've progressed in our relationship, I feel like the standard of how I'm allowed to speak to you has gotten increasingly more strict.
Yes.
And you have a very high standard for how I'm allowed to speak to you. And I think that sometimes the common misconception, or maybe even fear, when thinking about this is that it will silence the taken in hand.
Oh, yeah.
That it will somehow, maybe a taken in hand is like, if I have restrictions on how I'm allowed to speak, then I'm not going to be able to express myself. I'm not going to be able to speak freely. I'm going to lose my voice in the relationship. I'm going to lose my uniqueness. And that has not been the case for me. I feel very empowered to communicate anything I need to communicate to you. Even things that are hard, I feel very, very empowered to communicate. I just know that there is an appropriate way and an inappropriate way. And you do hold that standard pretty high.
And shifting gears just a minute, I think I would like to ask you a question that I've never asked before. When we started to establish this in the communication, and I started to hold you to a higher standard and how you communicate to me, were you taken back at first, or was that a little bit of a relief to you? Like, what was because I don't think I ever asked you what your response was. I saw it on your face, but I don't think I ever asked, what did that do to you emotionally? Was it hard at first? Did you think I was being kind of an overlord, but did you somehow come around to it?
I definitely went through a period where I felt like I was losing my voice. It felt like I wasn't able to express myself, and that's because I didn't know how to express myself appropriately, and so all I had was inappropriate communication, and because that was being punished, that was being corrected, I didn't feel like I had the ability to speak at all. And so I went through this period where I was really like insecure about every word that I would say and every interaction we had. And so it did take an adjustment, and that adjustment probably lasted all of a week. It wasn't a long adjustment period, but I remember when I would get worked up emotionally, when I would feel very strongly about something, that's when it became really hard. And so as I started to gain the skills to speak to you appropriately, that's when I started to realize, no, I can communicate anything I need to communicate. I have not lost my uniqueness. I have not lost my personality. I have not lost my ability to have a voice. I just need to shift how that looks.
I think the biggest takeaway there, she didn't lose her voice. And by doing this, you are not silencing her. And more importantly, it raises your taken hand to a standard that you want her to be at.
And I think it's important to note, too, that this standard never changes.
That's right. That's right.
In our casual conversations and communication, it's easy to maintain the standard because emotions aren't heightened.
That's true. That's right. It's easy when those aren't heightened, right?
But I know that if I did cross a line, if I took maybe our more casual interactions, jokes too far, if I did cross a line into becoming disrespectful, I know that that standard still applies and it still exists. But it's even more important when we're speaking to each other in a more heightened emotional state, when maybe I'm getting upset or we're having a hard conversation. It's even more important because that's when it becomes effort. At least on my part, I definitely have to be very aware of how I'm speaking to you, even still, because it is my natural inclination to go into being more defensive, into maybe trying to deflect blame, and all of those things are inappropriate. And so when I am upset, that's when it becomes more important, and that's when you have to be more aware as well of me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And this has been good because one of the things that I think happens in relationships without you even knowing is that we speak to each other poorly without even really knowing. And so what this does by holding your taken in hand to that standard and holding yourself to that standard, you begin to pick up on, wait a minute, don't talk to me like that. Don't say that to me. And you learn to communicate that in a way of, now wait a minute, you don't get to call me out on that. That's not a fair assessment. That's not right to say about me. It's not right to say it in that tone. The perfect example was there was something recently that had happened with us where Aria had mentioned something about my time management. And one of the things that she knows about me and other people have said about me is one of the things I don't have a problem with is managing my time and getting things done. And so I was able to stop and say, wait a minute, you don't get to say that about me. You're not allowed to say that, not even in that tone, but make that kind of statement because that's not even true about me. And I think by even in pointing that out, even in that conversation, you were able to go, oh, wow, wait a minute, I was really pushing back in a way that's not okay. And there have been other times where you have said something and I just can give you a look and you've gone, oh, okay, that was really crossing a line.
That was an interesting situation because I did not realize that I was being offensive towards you
Right.
in that, because I was trying to communicate that I was worried about it.
Right.
And you rightfully pointed out that in my concern, I was actually undermining your authority and your ability to manage the time. And that I had no right to be concerned because you were in charge of that and leading that. And so that was an interesting situation too, because that happened over text.
Right.
I didn't have a tone. But I definitely had a demeanor. It came out in my body language because you were on the phone and I was worried that we were going to run out of time for something. And so I texted you and I was like, hey, I'm really concerned that you're taking so long on this phone call. And after you got done with the phone call, you called me out for it, and it was a good thing.
Yeah, because I was very much aware of the time. I knew what needed to be done and whatnot. And it was not bad, and I want to point this out, it was not bad that she voiced her concern. I want to be very, very clear about that.
That's how I did it.
Exactly. Because the notion here can be, oh, it was the fact that she said something. No. This is part of what we were saying about she doesn't lose her voice. But it's all about how things are said and phrased. And that's why you said, yeah, it was how you did it. It wasn't the fact that you were pointing it out.
I think that if I would have simply texted you and been like, hey, are we going to still have time to? And you could have said, yep, fully aware of the time, don't worry about it. That would have been unaddressed.
Absolutely. That would have been a perfect way to handle it. Absolutely.
But it was because I kind of wrote an entire diatribe about I would have to look back on my text to see exactly what I wrote. But I remember I was just really like, I don't think you should be taking this long on the phone. It was inappropriate.
And I could even tell because I was in the house.
Oh yeah, we were sitting next to each other.
I could feel from her all of the anxiety, and almost like irritation that was coming. And it was just like, oh, no, this isn't like a worry or a concern. This has become an anxiety irritation with her. And so I've got to tell her, look, I'm aware. You need to just not worry about it. and so I think that is the point, is that there are certain things that throughout the day that we say and do sometimes to each other that we need to be aware of. And that you specifically need, as head of households, to bring to the attention of your taken in hand. Because again, she's not going to be aware of it until you point it out, until you say, look, I have been concerned about how you say things. It's not necessarily that you don't have valid concerns, but how you say them, how you go about it, the words you use, the tone of voice, the attitude that I'm sensing from you. So what we're going to do is we're going to raise that standard. I expect to be talked to this way. If you have this emotion, I expect you to try to process through it before you talk to me. Or what I've always said too is, which is why we have the corrections in place. If it's there and it's been too heightened, you have the ability to say, you know what? We're going to take care of that because this emotion is taking over. But you set the standard in such a way that she's aware of, I need to be very, very careful with how I voice the concern or whatever it is that I have to him, because we're trying to really take the relationship to another level and how we talk to one another.
And if you have a standard, you have to uphold that standard with discipline.
That's right.
The only way that you get to the point where a taken in hand can take that seriously, can have that pause and that caution, is to know that there are real consequences on the other side of not taking the standard seriously. I know for us that I can think of at least half a dozen times where I've been punished for my tone of voice. And I think that that's important to point out, is that as a head of household, if you're sensing the anxiety, the attitude coming targeted towards you, that means that you can preemptively correct that with a correction. Mm-hmm. If you're sensing it and you can catch it early, but once it actually crosses that line into inappropriate communication, that's when you really do need to hold punishment.
Absolutely. And it's also disrespectful. And that's the biggest thing that I think as a head of household, I am still learning, but I did not realize how those little tiny things were being disrespectful to me. They were disrespecting me not only as the head of our relationship, but also just as a person. And remember, this dynamic is to help you guys establish respect as a couple for one another. And what you're doing here with the taking in hand is saying, look, as your head of household, because not only am I the head, but I'm also a person, I deserve certain things by being that. And in the same token, again, what this does is this also establishes, hey, as taken in hand, she also deserves some of those things. But this also takes practice. This takes just doing it. And we haven't mastered it yet. She will tell you there are things that even these days I'm trying to get better, that I've let slide, that I need to be better of saying, you know what? That was not okay. You may not even have meant it that way, but I'm pointing it out to you because it was not okay. And because that's the only way they're going to be able to change is if you point it out.
And I think that it's important to note that this is an ongoing process. This isn't
Yes.
something that you completely master and then never ever deal with ever again.
I wish that was the case.
But when Coda started holding this standard, there was that initial adjustment period where it was hard in the beginning, for me at least, to kind of understand the difference between inappropriate and appropriate communication, and understand that that didn't mean that I was losing any ability to communicate. And so we kind of got through that like first initial hard period, and then it did start to become easier. It did start to become where this isn't addressed on an ongoing basis anymore. But I feel like communication is more of a subconscious thing. How we communicate is more reactionary, at least on the women's side. I don't know.
I think there's a point there. Yeah.
And so I know that I still struggle sometimes, and Coda does have to step in and say, that was inappropriate. You're going to be punished because you can't speak to me that way.
That's right. That's right.
And again, it doesn't happen very often, but when it does kind of like bring me back in under his authority to say, okay, I definitely did step outside of his authority here by kind of stepping outside my role, by not treating him appropriately. And so because I did that, it is right for me to be punished, to come back under that authority, to reestablish the hierarchy of our relationship, to reestablish those authority roles within our relationship so that we can get back to the harmonious communication and the harmonious way of interacting with each other.
And so the big key here, head of households, is that if this is a conversation that you haven't been having, or you guys have found that, well, we were really hoping domestic discipline would solve some of these maybe shouting matches that we had, or all these kind of things, maybe you haven't addressed communication effectively. And my guess is, yeah, you probably haven't. And you need to have a conversation with your taken in hand of, we're going to raise the standard here of what you're allowed to say to me, how you're allowed to say it. And we are going to raise the bar in being respectful in what you say and how you address me. And you will find, again, taken in hands, that when he does that, it's going to be an adjustment. But head of households, remember that when you do that, I think it will just naturally happen. I know you'll return that respect to her, and you'll find that you're going to have these disagreements, these arguments a lot less because of that.
That's true, and I feel like it's so important to note that as a head of household, you really do set the tone of the relationship. So if you want your taken in hand to speak to you respectfully, you have to set that example by how you're speaking and interacting with them.
That's right.
You can't be harsh. You can't raise your voice if that's an unacceptable way for your taken in hand to speak to you. You have to be measured. Obviously, there are times when a head of household has to be stern, has to use a very direct tone, has to verbally correct their taken in hand. those are all things that your taken in hand would never do to you, but is well within your role to do to her. However, you do need to be very, very controlled and very measured in how you speak, because that is, I think that's the principle behind all of this, is that you need to be in control of how you communicate and in control of how you speak to one another. And as a head of household, if you are requiring that of your taken in hand, then you need to display that when you're communicating to her. And if you're starting to see a breakdown of your communication towards her, that's when you need to step back, evaluate what's going on, and then determine, is correction or punishment necessary here? Why am I getting frustrated? Why am I getting angry? Why am I being tempted to be harsh towards her? Okay, it's because she's speaking inappropriately to me. So I'm just going to correct that through punishment. I'm going to hold the standard. I'm not going to allow myself to get angry. I'm not going to allow myself to get frustrated, engage that argument, because I have the power to shut it down. And that's something that you really had to learn.
Yeah, and to a certain extent, I'm still learning. But yes, and what you will find is you're able to step back and say, nope. I'm not going to react to that, and it's as simple as, you don't get to talk to me like that, you're going to have a correction or a punishment, we're going to take care of this right now. It's amazing what that does, because then in other aspects of your life, you have almost that same interaction with other people, from the standpoint of, if something starts to go awry with somebody else, I found myself to where I go, you know what, I'm not engaging in a conversation with you any longer, and I walk away. And it has prevented me from having all kinds of disagreements and arguments and having all kinds of heightened emotions with other people. And so that's where this is very, very helpful to your overall health of your relationship and your life. And I just want to point out really, really quick that, as we mentioned, taken in hands, that you're not going to be losing your voice. Just the other day, one of the things that happened when I was communicating poorly, it helped. Aria was able to, what this dynamic has done, because I already hold a high standard with her, she communicated where I was actually communicating to her poorly, but she did it in a very respectful way. And so that was big. She didn't lose her voice, but she was able to say, hey, this was a scenario where I think you failed. But again, she didn't do it in a way of pointing fingers, yelling back at me, and all of those kind of things. And so even when you potentially fail as a head of household, it still establishes her ability to be able to help you, but in the right ways. And that really cuts down on a lot of stuff that you have struggled with, and I know, in your relationships, probably up to this point.
All right, guys, I hope that you found this helpful. I hope that you enjoyed this conversation. Let us know what you think down below, and we will talk to you next time.
Thanks for coming.